My name is Claire Hawthorne. As a security guard escorted me from the building, I maintained perfect composure, my face a mask of professional indifference. I could feel the eyes of my former colleagues watching from behind partially closed blinds, their expressions a mix of pity and relief that it wasn't them. The security guard, a kind man named Marcus, who had greeted me every morning for years, kept apologizing under his breath. "It's company policy. Ms. Hawthorne, I'm really sorry about this." I simply nodded, clutching my personal items in a cardboard box. A coffee mug, a few framed photos, a small potted succulent that had somehow survived 3 years of neglectful watering. What wasn't in the box were the most important things: my code, my algorithms, my life's work, or so they thought. As we reached the lobby, I remembered the clause I'd buried deep within the acquisition contract years ago. The words of that forgotten paragraph ran through my mind like a mantra. In the event of termination without cause, Claire Hawthorne retains the right to repurchase the entirety of Neurosynth Labs, including all intellectual property, assets, and client relationships, for the sum of $1 $1.00. They had just made the most expensive mistake of their corporate lives. 9 years earlier, I sat cross-legged on the worn hardwood floor of my Chicago apartment, balancing a laptop on my knees and a bowl of instant ramen beside me. The radiator clanked and wheezed, barely keeping the winter chill at bay. Outside, Lake Michigan winds howled around the corners of my building, but I barely noticed. I was deep in a coding trance, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I was building something new, an algorithm that could analyze micro-expressions and linguistic patterns to determine emotional states with unprecedented accuracy. Not the crude sentiment analysis tools already flooding the market. This was different. This could detect the subtle difference between performative enthusiasm and genuine interest, between polite agreement and true conviction. It could tell when someone was lying to themselves. The potential applications were endless: customer service optimization, mental health screening, marketing response prediction. But what had sparked my interest initially was a more personal use. I wanted to understand why my last relationship had failed so spectacularly, when all the surface signals had seemed so positive. By dawn, I had the first functioning prototype, crude, limited. But it worked. I tested it on transcripts of old conversations, and the results were startling in their accuracy. The algorithm detected patterns I had missed entirely: signs of disengagement, hesitation, conflicted emotions. It saw through the pleasant facade to the uncomfortable truth beneath. 3 months later, my algorithm saved a major pharmacy chain from a potential $900 million public relations disaster. They had been planning to launch a mental health support campaign that, according to my analysis, would trigger profound negative responses in their target demographic. The campaign messaging hit too close to personal trauma markers while simultaneously coming across as inauthentic. The company's internal focus groups had missed it entirely. Their traditional analytics had given them a green light. But my algorithm detected the problematic pattern, and I had the data to prove it. That was when I knew I had something revolutionary on my hands. Building the initial team for Neurosynth Labs was like assembling a band of misfits for a heist movie. There was Raj, a brilliant data scientist who dropped out of his PhD program because the pace was criminally slow. Zoe, a UX designer who approached interface problems with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. And Marcus? Yes, the same Marcus who would later escort me from the building, a former security specialist whose insights on data protection proved invaluable. We worked out of a converted warehouse space in Chicago's West Loop, surviving on cold pizza and cheaper coffee than any of us had drunk since college. Our first server was cobbled together from parts purchased on eBay. Our desks were doors laid across sawhorses. But the code was elegant, revolutionary, beautiful. Venture capital came sniffing around by the end of the first year. We turned down the first few offers. They wanted too much control for too little money. But when Lucent Core Ventures approached us in our third year, the offer seemed different. They promised operational autonomy, generous funding, and a commitment to our vision of ethical AI development. "We don't want to change what you're doing," said James Weston, Lucent Core's managing partner, a silver-haired man with the polished confidence of someone who'd never had to doubt his place in the world. "We want to amplify it." The acquisition was structured strangely. Technically, they bought the company for just $1, but with a complex series of performance bonuses that could potentially value the deal at over $200 million. CEO, I would remain as CTO, maintaining control of the technical direction. My lawyer, Madeline Rowe, a razor-sharp woman who'd built her practice representing tech founders, insisted on one unusual clause. If I was ever terminated without cause, I could buy back the entire company for $1. "They'll never go for it," I told her. "They might not even notice it," she replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "It's buried in Section 14, subsection B, right after 20 pages of standard legal boilerplate. And if they're stupid enough to sign it, you should hold on to it for dear life." Surprisingly, they signed. The deal closed, and Neurosynth Labs became a subsidiary of Lucent Core Ventures. For the first 2 years, everything proceeded as promised. We expanded our team, moved into proper offices, and landed contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Our technology evolved from promising to industry-leading. Then, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with meetings. Suddenly, my calendar was filled with brand alignment discussions and corporate culture integrations instead of technical reviews and development planning. New executives appeared in our org chart. People I hadn't interviewed, hadn't approved, and in some cases, hadn't even met. The first major red flag was Bryn Foster, our new chief marketing officer. She arrived from a consumer packaged goods background with zero tech experience, but a portfolio of brand transformations to her name. Within weeks, she was pushing for a complete visual overhaul of our product. "The interface is too clinical," she explained during a meeting I'd almost been excluded from. "We need something warmer, more emotionally engaging. People want to feel good about the AI they're using." "Our clients aren't looking for warm and fuzzy," I countered. "They want precision and insight. The clinical look communicates competence and reliability." Bryn smiled the particular smile of someone who has already secured approval from powers above you. "Research suggests otherwise, Claire. We need to humanize the technology." I later discovered that this research consisted of a single focus group with 8 participants, none of whom were actual users of our product. Next came Liam Bradford, our new CFO, Ivy League MBA, immaculately tailored suits, and a habit of referring to our work as the product offering rather than by its actual name. He began restructuring our financial operations with an eye toward maximizing valuation potential. A phrase I soon learned meant cutting costs that don't show up in demos. Research funding was the first to go. Long-term projects were shelved in favor of superficial feature additions that could be highlighted in sales presentations. My protests were acknowledged with professional courtesy and then summarily ignored. My influence was being systematically eroded, but the full extent of the situation didn't hit me until the quarterly strategy meeting 6 months after Bryn's arrival. I arrived at the conference room to find a PowerPoint presentation already loaded on the main screen. The title slide featured an animated cartoon brain with a smiley face, surrounded by colorful bubbles labeled with emotions. Happy, excited, satisfied. "What is this?" I asked, looking around at the assembled executives. "Our new product direction," Bryn explained cheerfully. "We're calling it Happy Mind. It's a pivot toward the consumer wellness space." I stared at her in disbelief. "We don't do consumer wellness. We build enterprise-grade emotional intelligence systems for corporate clients." Liam cleared his throat. "The B2B space is becoming saturated. Claire, our market research indicates substantial growth potential in direct-to-consumer applications." "What market research? I've seen no data on this." "It was handled through external consultants," he replied smoothly. "The reports are still being finalized." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that not only had this major strategic shift been planned without my input, but my role in presenting our technology had been eliminated entirely. Bryn would handle the product demonstration, with Liam covering the business projections. My name appeared exactly once in the 60-slide presentation, on the original team slide near the end, where I was listed as Claire Hawthorne, technical co-founder, not CTO, not even current employee, technical co-founder, past tense. That's when I knew this wasn't a gradual shift. It was a carefully orchestrated exit strategy. They were preparing to push me out. That night, I went home and pulled out the acquisition contract. I found Section 14, subsection B, and reread the clause Madeline had inserted. It was still there, untouched and legally binding. I called her immediately. Madeline, it's Claire. I need to know if that buyback clause is still valid. The dollar buyback? Let me check. I could hear her typing. Have they completed the formal corporate merger? The clause applies only if Neurosynth technically still exists as a legal entity. I don't think so. Last I heard, they were keeping us as a separate subsidiary for tax purposes. More typing. Then yes, it should still be valid. They never struck it during the final review, and all parties signed. Why? Are they trying to push you out? Not trying. Planning. I just need to be prepared. Her voice softened. Claire, if they're stupid enough to fire you without cause, you should absolutely invoke this clause. It would be the corporate equivalent of stepping on a landmine they planted themselves. The next day, I withdrew $1 from an ATM and had it converted into a cashier's check. I placed it in an envelope along with a printed copy of Section 14B, and I put it in my desk drawer. Then, I waited. 3 weeks later, an innocuous calendar invitation appeared in my inbox. Thursday discussion was all it said, scheduled for 4:30 p.m. with Bryn, Liam, and Diane from HR. No agenda, no details. I knew immediately what it meant. I spent that Thursday morning backing up personal files and clearing out my desk in small, unnoticeable batches. I transferred my personal photos to my phone. I took home my favorite coffee mug. By the time 4:30 rolled around, there was little left that I cared about. The meeting was held in a small conference room on the executive floor. Not my usual territory. Bryn, Liam, and Diane were already seated when I arrived, their expressions a carefully composed blend of solemnity and forced compassion. Claire, thank you for joining us, Diane began, her HR-trained voice gentle but firm. I'm afraid we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding the technical leadership structure of Neurosynth. I simply nodded, waiting. The company is moving in a new direction, Liam continued. And after careful consideration, we've determined that your skills and vision are no longer aligned with our strategic objectives. We want to thank you for your foundational contributions. Bryn added, not quite meeting my eyes. Neurosynth wouldn't exist without you, but companies evolve, and sometimes that means leadership changes are necessary. Diane slid a folder across the table. We're prepared to offer a generous separation package, 3 months' salary as severance, continued health benefits through the end of the quarter, and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I opened the folder and skimmed the documents, my face betraying nothing. And the reason for termination. Diane shifted uncomfortably. It's technically a position elimination. We're restructuring the technical department under a new VP of Product Innovation who will absorb the CTO responsibilities. Position elimination, not for cause. They had just triggered the clause. I signed the papers without comment, handed over my laptop and security badge, and allowed Marcus to escort me from the building. As we reached the front doors, he whispered, "This isn't right, Ms. Hawthorne. Everyone knows it." I simply thanked him and walked out into the crisp autumn air, already mentally composing my next steps. The following morning, I mailed a letter to each member of Lucent Core's board of directors. Each envelope contained an identical message. Pursuant to Section 14, subsection B of the acquisition agreement dated November 15, 2016, I hereby exercise my right to repurchase Neurosynth Labs in its entirety for the sum of $1 US. $1 worth 0. Enclosed, please find payment in full. Ownership transfer is effective immediately upon receipt. All intellectual property, client relationships, and assets now revert to my ownership. Regards, Claire Hawthorne, founder and CEO, Neurosynth Labs. Each envelope contained a photocopy of the original contract clause with all signatures visible, and a crisp, new $1 bill. I could have sent the cashier's check, but there was something symbolically powerful about the physical currency. The response was nuclear. By noon, my phone was exploding with calls from Lucent Core's legal team, from board members, from Liam and Bryn. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I called Madeline and asked her to handle the communication. They're claiming the clause is unenforceable, she reported back that afternoon. But their arguments are weak. They never formally merged the companies, so Neurosynth still exists as a separate legal entity registered in Delaware. You were terminated without cause through a position elimination. All conditions for the buyback have been met. What's their next move? They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. My sources say they're in panic mode. Your algorithm is powering nearly 80% of their current revenue stream. Without it, Lucent Core's valuation drops by 2/3 overnight. I allowed myself a small smile. And legally, do we stand firm? Rock solid. They'd need to prove fraud or coercion in the original contract, and there was none. They just didn't read the fine print. Classic corporate oversight, the kind that costs companies millions. Over the next 48 hours, the situation escalated rapidly. Lucent Core's legal department finally confirmed what Madeline had already told me. The buyback clause was valid and enforceable. I was now the legal owner of Neurosynth Labs again. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. 3 major clients, sensing instability, put their contracts on hold. Employees began updating their LinkedIn profiles. Bryn and Liam organized an emergency all-hands meeting to attempt damage control, but without access to the core algorithm, which I had remotely locked, their reassurances rang hollow. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with messages from former team members. Raj was the first to reach out. Whatever you're planning next, I want in. That place has been soul-crushing since the suits took over. Zoe followed shortly after. Please tell me you're rebuilding. I've got UI designs they rejected that would blow your mind. Even some of the newer engineers, people I'd barely had a chance to know, sent tentative inquiries about my future plans. I signed a lease on a new office space, deliberately located just 2 blocks from Neurosynth's current headquarters. I filed paperwork for a new entity, Synth Reboot, Inc., and I began systematically reaching out to the team I wanted to rebuild with. Our first gathering felt like a reunion of exiles. 15 people crowded into the empty office space, sitting on folding chairs or cross-legged on the floor. I'd ordered pizza, a nostalgic nod to our startup days, and brought in a whiteboard salvaged from a university surplus sale. So here's where we stand, I began, uncapping a marker. I now legally own Neurosynth and all its intellectual property. But rather than trying to reclaim the old company, which is currently imploding under its own bureaucratic weight, we're going to build something new, something better. I drew a simple diagram on the whiteboard, a network of interconnected nodes with pathways branching outward. The core algorithm was brilliant, but it was just the beginning. What I've realized is that we were thinking too small. We were letting corporations use our technology to manipulate customer emotions for profit. What if instead, we built tools that helped people understand their own emotional responses? What if we democratized emotional intelligence? Raj raised his hand. Are you talking about pivoting to consumer applications? I laughed. Ironically, yes, but not the gamified, data harvesting nonsense Bryn was pushing. I'm talking about genuine tools for self-awareness and communication improvement. And here's the key difference. Transparent code, user data privacy as a foundational principle, and a freemium model that makes basic tools accessible to everyone. For the next 3 hours, we held what I later dubbed our War Council. We identified what had gone wrong at Neurosynth, what we could salvage, and what needed to be rebuilt from scratch. We assigned preliminary roles and responsibilities. We set audacious goals and realistic timelines. By midnight, as the last of the team filtered out, promising to return the next day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the electric thrill of building something meaningful. Not just code, but community. Not just products, but purpose. 3 months later, Synth Reboot launched its first product, an open API for basic emotional intelligence analysis, with transparent documentation and rigorous privacy protections. We released a portion of our code as an open-source project on GitHub, creating a community of developers who began building applications we'd never imagined. Meanwhile, Neurosynth Labs, the corporate shell that remained under Lucent Core's management, was floundering. Without the core algorithm and the team that built it, they were left with marketing materials and unfulfillable promises. Lucent Core's stock dropped 37% in a single quarter. I received an unexpected invitation to deliver a keynote address at Tech Revolution, one of the industry's premier conferences. The topic? Resilience and reinvention in tech entrepreneurship. Standing on that stage, facing an audience of thousands, I told our story, not as a revenge tale, though there was certainly an element of that, but as a cautionary tale about the value of intellectual property, the importance of reading contracts, and the power of building technology with ethical principles at its core. At the conclusion of my speech, I pulled the original dollar bill from my pocket, the one I'd used to buy back my company. "Never underestimate a woman who writes code and reads contracts," I said, holding the dollar up to the light. Sometimes the smallest clause can change everything. The applause was thunderous, the standing ovation immediate. As I left the stage, my phone began buzzing with notifications. Dollar buyback was trending on Twitter. Tech blogs were already publishing articles with headlines like, "Female founder reclaims stolen company for $1," and "The billion-dollar contract clause that changed tech history." Within days, Liam resigned from Lucent Core, citing personal reasons and a desire to explore new opportunities. Bryn published a rambling LinkedIn post featuring a stock photo of an eagle soaring over mountains and a misattributed Oprah Winfrey quote about rising from adversity. 1 year after my unceremonious escort from the Neurosynth building, Synth Reboot had grown to a team of 47, with offices in Chicago and Boston. Our user base numbered in the millions. Our technology had been adapted for educational applications, mental health support tools, and communication aids for neurodivergent individuals. But what gave me the most satisfaction wasn't the success or the vindication. It was the knowledge that we had transformed a tool originally designed to help corporations manipulate emotions into one that helped individuals understand themselves and connect more authentically with others. Our new logo, a glowing key inserted into an opening brain, symbolized our mission: unlocking human potential through emotional intelligence, not exploiting it for profit. In a quiet moment between meetings, I sometimes take out that dollar bill, now framed on my office wall, and reflect on how differently things might have turned out. If I hadn't insisted on that clause, if I hadn't been prepared when the inevitable happened, if I hadn't been willing to start over, the algorithm they tried to steal from me is now partially in the public domain, protected by a robust open-source community. The portion we keep proprietary continues to evolve in ways the corporate structure would never have permitted. I don't celebrate what happened to Neurosynth or Lucent Core. Business failures mean jobs lost and lives disrupted, but I do celebrate what rose from those ashes: a company built on transparency, ethical principles, and genuine innovation. Sometimes the most valuable code isn't what runs on your servers, it's what you write into your contracts, your company culture, and your personal integrity. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rebuilding something better than what was taken from you. Just ask the woman who bought back her company for $1 and then changed an industry. Just ask me, Claire Hawthorne.